Let everyone in. Here we go.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Pasadena Photography Arts co-director Douglas Hill. I'd like to welcome you all to our latest forum, virtual talk, The Uncertainty of Being, with this year's Pasadena Photography Arts Award winner, Joyce Ernst. We were deeply honored to have distinguished gallerist Rose Shoshana as our guest juror. Thank you, Rose, for giving so freely of your time and considerable expertise. This installment of Forum is being presented in part through the generosity of our good friend Susan Gans. If you would like to find out how you can underwrite a future event such as this, please email us. From the beginning, PPA has been dedicated to fostering the photography community on the east side of Los Angeles. Toward that end, we are proud to support these entities dedicated to photography and the arts. Our next forum will be presented online on November 13th. We're excited to have fellow PPA advisor Fred Brashear Jr. with us to present Uncertain Future, A Species in Peril, which addresses the very real threat to California's Joshua trees. And with that, let the show begin. Joyce Ernst is a lens-based artist whose work explores the tensions of the human experience, capturing the emotional landscapes that are universal. Her photographs are often unsettling and enigmatic, engaging a twisted frequency replete with evocative color and missing information. Joyce grew up in suburban Philadelphia and now lives in Dallas, Texas, and Sun Valley, Idaho. In addition to holding a BA and MBA from the University of Virginia, she completed an MFA in Media Studies at the Maine Media College last year. Her work has been exhibited by Studio 162 in Rockport, Maine, the Atlanta Photography Group, the Texas Photographic Society, the Sun Valley Airport Committee, and numerous online magazines and galleries. It's my very great pleasure to introduce the second annual PPA Award winner, Joyce Ernst.
Hey, thank you so much, Doug. I really appreciate being here. Thank you to Pasadena Photography Arts, the founder, Bill Wishner, and co-directors Doug Hill and Ellen Friedlander. Can't see you, Ellen, but I know you're on the screen there. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about my artistic practice. I'd also like to thank the juror, Rose Shoshana of Rose Gallery in Santa Monica. I looked at her interview questions and I could just tell from the questions she really understood my work, which is always really gratifying. And then Ian Wright, last year's winner, he did a great interview with me on Instagram last week, so that was fantastic. And then finally, Alexi, who has kind of held everything together and made all of these events possible from tonight. And then also the article that was in Lens Scratch, which was great. So thank you, everyone. I am just extremely grateful for this honor. So would you like me to start my chat?
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah,
Jump into the
okay.
presentation.
I'm going to share my screen. And okay.
Oh, wait.
Look good, Alexi?
No, it did the wrong thing. Try again.
Oh, okay. We'll do it again.
No one saw this. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. Here we go.
Yes. Perfect.
How about that? Perfect?
Yay.
Great. Okay, technology, you know, the biggest hurdle sometimes. Okay, so the body of work that is being recognized is called The Uncertainty of Being. And I made this over the past 3 years. I graduated from the Maine Media College MFA program last November, and this work was part of my thesis project. So these are installation photos from the group show, which was held in Rockport, Maine. And you know, it's a whole different experience looking at work on a screen versus being in person with it. So I just wanted to point out a few things about the work. The images are all photographs. They're shot with a digital camera. And for the most part, they were made, the images were made in camera, and I've made some adjustments to the color in post. There are archival pigment prints printed on matte rag paper and presented without borders. I think the scale of the prints is pretty large, and it's important to mention. The largest one here, the silhouette against the orange background on the right, that's almost 3 feet by 4 feet, just to give you an idea. So it's really hard to categorize this work. These are photographs of people, but they're not documentary and they're not portraits. They're taken on the streets, but I wouldn't describe them as street photography. Most of the works are like this. They're very layered and you can spend a lot of time with them. As I mentioned, they're shot in camera. So a lot of the layering is created by reflections or shooting through translucent surfaces. And there's a lot of visual interruptions in the images, like vertical and diagonal lines and multiple planes. So there's a lot going on. And then finally, I've used very strong saturated color, which I think adds to the emotional impact of the photographs. So to me, these photographs work on an emotional level, and they're expressive of a range of psychological and emotional ways of being. Especially when you look at them as a body of work, I think they're saying something about the human condition. Sorry. There are a number of themes or feelings that come up in the work, from anxiety and visual overwhelm to defeat or resignation or a sense of a loneliness. Sometimes the photographs are nostalgic or poignant. But often I kind of feel this sense of separateness from others. And you, like this woman, like we're all walking in our own little reveries. So people often ask me, how do you see these things? And honestly, sometimes I really don't know. I mean, sometimes when I'm looking at them on the screen after I've shot, I can't even remember taking the picture. And then after the fact, I often notice little details. Like in this picture on the bus, you can see in neon, it says, "Have a nice day," which I think it's kind of funny given the rest of the content. So the art critic, John Berger, he had this to say about seeing. Every image is a way of seeing. We never look at just one thing. We're always looking at the relationship between things and ourselves. So the artist, the creator, and the context have as much to do with how people read an image as what's in the picture or their own preconceptions or worldview. And what I've realized in my work is that the way I see the world through the camera, like the photographic choices I'm making very intuitively, what I choose to take pictures of, all of these decisions have been influenced by my personal story. And so I just want to share a little bit of that with you. So this is me as a kid, and I'd like to think that my table manners have improved a little bit over the years. But, yeah, I was adopted as an infant, and this was in the 1960s. I grew up in suburban Philadelphia. And back then, adoptions were closed, and everything about the process was very secretive. So I grew up, I always knew I was adopted, but I also knew not to ask a lot of questions. So from the very beginning, I've always understood the world in terms of incomplete information. And I think that's influenced the way I see the world. I'm very curious. I mean, I'm always seeking answers. And sometimes I can't really see, I can see the pieces, but not the whole. And often I know what I notice are the inconsistencies and the juxtapositions and the humor in the world too. And while this work and most of my work is not explicitly about being adopted, I think the themes and the emotional content of the work are very much informed by that. I want to read a few sentences from my artist statement. In many ways, it makes sense that I've chosen photography as my artistic medium because there's a relationship between the instability of perception and how I experience the world. A photograph can give the impression of truth and be puzzling at the same time. I think a good photograph asks questions. This body of work, The Uncertainty of Being, investigates looking for something that is both ambiguous and specific. So the subject matter might be very clear, but the feelings evoked might be ambiguous, or the subject matter may be unclear, but the feelings just hit you over the head. I started making this work toward the end of the pandemic when restrictions were easing, and I started shooting in cities. And the images I was making were layered and dense and very evocative. And that was very different from what I'd been doing before. And you'll see some of my older work later on in the presentation. Doug had asked me to show that, and you'll be able to see how that differs. So the pictures often have a feeling of loneliness. The figures in the photographs seem together and alone at the same time. And that made me start to think about the spaces between people and how difficult it really is to know another person. You can see that theme of disconnection here as well. These two people are on different visual planes, and the architecture in the image helps to create that sense of separation. So frames within frames and diagonal lines, those things are working to contribute to that feeling. And they're devices that show up frequently in my work. Sometimes the figures in the pictures seem to be vaporizing, or they're leaving the frame. There's a sense of mystery, and there's this feeling of things slipping away or loss. This is another example of a ghost-like figure. I think it's interesting because it's depicting a presence and an absence at the same time. And it's kind of like a positive, negative all in one. It also reminds me of the idea of an after image, what you see after something is gone. If you think about how we look at photographs versus paintings or other forms of art, I think we have a tendency to look for a narrative, and it might be because of how we're wired, or maybe because of the media culture we're in. But the more time I spent with this work, the more I realized that these pictures are meant to be felt more than analyzed. This is a good example. This kind of hovers between a dream and a nightmare for me. It gives me this feeling of anxiety. And I think the photographic choices I made contribute to that. The vantage point's kind of uncomfortably close. I've cropped off body parts and used focal compression and blur, and all of these things create a discomfort. One of the things Rose commented on is that the photographs exist somewhere between abstraction and figuration. Well, they contain people, but the people in them are blurred or obscured. And I think by making these images that exist between abstraction and figuration, you're more likely to experience these on an emotional level. So Richard Avedon said all photographs are accurate, but none of them is the truth. I think about that a lot. What is true? You know, how two seemingly opposing things can be true at the same time, for example, and just generally about the instability of perception. And this is kind of fascinating. I mean, when we look at something, the way perception works, our brains are always sort of filling in information gaps, and our eyes are moving around and making these composites, and these visuals are very dynamic. So our perception is changing as we're getting new information. And so our understanding of the world is constantly in flux. And that kind of gets back to really the whole idea behind this work, this central idea of uncertainty. So people usually ask me how I make the work or what my process is. And photographers, you know, they make work in a lot of different ways, but one way of separating it out is finders and constructors. So some photographers like Gregory Crutzen or Cindy Sherman, they construct images. Each shot is really carefully planned out. It may involve casting or set design and very specific lighting. But then there are other photographers who are finders, and like street photographer Dido Moriyama or Gary Winogrand, they went out and found things. And my style is more finding. I go out into the world. I usually don't have much of a plan. I probably have a destination. I try not to think too much, but just be present and respond to whatever is attracting me. And then I edit very fast and intuitively, and I make a lot of proof prints. And I spend a lot of time looking at the work. And then I'm beginning to see repetition and patterns and different themes. And then I'll play around with different groupings. And at the same time, I'm writing. So I'm writing generatively, and it could be about anything, a film I just saw or a conversation I overheard. And I write about the work. But I try not to filter or be overly analytical until a little bit further in the process. But yeah, it's just writing and thinking and rehashing. And eventually I'll begin to have a better understanding of what the work is saying and what images work together. And then I start thinking about how I would want this work seen. You know, should it be on a wall, or is it better as a book, or should it be a projection? So that's kind of how the process flows. So Doug had asked that I shared some of the earlier work, and I'm going to show examples from 2 prior bodies of work. So this first is a body of work I called Stranger Things. It will be obvious when you see the work why. The photographs are really an exploration of the absurd, and the subject matter is often bizarre or presented in kind of a weird way. And often the images are a little disorienting. You really have to study them to figure out what's going on. So sometimes they're funny, or the subject matter is kind of unexpected or mundane. Or the spatial relationships are a little bit weird. Sometimes there's a kind of visual juxtaposition in the photograph that, you know, might elicit some kind of feeling or chuckle. This next body of work these images are part of a series called Things May Fall Apart. And this work, the themes that were coming out were about entropy and decay. But, you know, they also had some humor in them as well. And often humor can be an entry point, but it was this pairing of humor and pathos that was really interesting to me. The work even had sort of an element of social commentary sometimes. This image, these are hamburger buns kind of thrown across a pavement. So it could be some sort of commentary on the state of the American dream. Or here, the deterioration of our natural habitats. But I think the overall effect of this body of work was a feeling of hovering or being in an in-between state, kind of being on the brink of where things could go either way, which I think, you know, a lot of us can relate to right now. So right now I'm working on combining text and image. And if you think about the transition I made visually from these last two bodies of work, which are shot in focus and very straightforward, to the city work, which is much more abstract, you can see the newer work is more complicated and layered. And so it made sense to me to try to add another layer of meaning. And I did that through sequencing, you know, how you put the images together, and then through writing, through text. And I really, I think about a photographer I really admire, Wolfgang Tillmans. He also explores the human condition in his work, and he is really fantastic at extending meaning. And these are some shots of his exhibition To Look Without Fear, which was at MoMA in 2022. And he was interested in creating new meaning through spatial relationships among images, how he sequenced them. And it was kind of amazing. His works would be pinned or taped to the wall, hung with binder clips or displayed on tabletop displays. And there would be these giant abstracts next to these little postcard size images next to a news article. And it really, it kind of provided an infinite way to make connections. So most recently, in doing that, you know, in trying to extend meaning, I made a book. I was working with Maureen Cummins and Richard Wright Smith at the Maine Media College Book Arts Studio. And I thought it might be helpful to read through the text and I'll read the text while I'm showing you the images. And this is, you'll see some of the images you've already seen, but this is called A Series of Bad Decisions. I used to imagine my mother was undercover agent Julie Barnes from the Mod Squad. She was busy busting drug traffickers and hunting down kidnappers, and that's how I ended up at 421 Prospect Road with Jim and Dot Jennings. That's where I spent a lot of time reading the Guinness Book of World Records. I was curious about the man with the 77-inch fingernails. Could he pick up a sandwich or use a typewriter? How did he tie his shoes? 421 Prospect Road is the place I first thought about time travel and splitting the atom, how there is a before and there is an after. Before he gets the diagnosis, before the dog lunges, before she drinks the third gin and tonic, before she realizes she has been taken to the Church of Scientology, before there is one thing, and after, on the other side, there's something else. After, there are inversions. Up is down and down is up. After, there are migrations and apparitions and whimpers. After, there are prophets in the grocery store, on street corners, outside nightclubs and weed shops. They offer warnings, warnings with the momentum of asteroids blazing toward you. And you are a sitting duck, walking on the hot coals of grief, caught between bewilderment and your desire for relief from a vague and unbearable misunderstanding. So that's a short book. And then I'm also revisiting a book that I did a couple of years ago called Person of Interest. It's a combination of found images and my own photography. And the sequence in the book moved back and forth between time periods. And just as you'd begin to piece together a narrative, there'd be a disruption. So the reader is really challenged to unravel meaning. And so that was all images, but now I'm going back and reworking that book to include some text. So those are the things I'm working on now. I'm also continuing to shoot, to look, to write, and I hope this gives you some insight into the work. Thanks again to Pasadena Photography Arts for this recognition. I'd also like to thank many of the mentors that I've had over the years: Sig Harvey, Howard and Elizabeth Greenberg, Charlotte Dixon, and more recently, Joanne Dugan. Thanks to everyone who came for the talk. And, you know, I look forward to questions.
Thanks so much, Joyce.
Yeah.
The work is brilliant, and I'm glad that you agreed to show work from other bodies of work as well. It's always interesting to me, anyway, to see that there is a body of work has generally come out of the theories and other works that have gone before, not necessarily in a straight line by any means, but that there are certain things that an artist has been considering and working on, usually for years, before they've arrived at a certain group of images. I also want to just say, before I say anything else, I love the sense of humor in your work. That while you take some things clearly very seriously, you're willing to laugh at the absurdity of a lot of what's in the world, and the work reflects that, and I think it makes it much richer and more interesting for me to look at. So I want
Thank
to
you.
thank you
Yeah.
for that. See, a few things kind of jumped out at me, and you kind of answered some of them, and but you had mentioned Moriyama and Winogrand and Tillmans. Are there other photographers or artists of any stripe that you see as really significant influences and or touchstones in what you do?
Sure. You know, it's funny because when I think about what influences my art, I think way beyond photography and art, because for me, film is very influential, as well as music and books. So, you know, a lot of the things I'm thinking about are supported by the literature I'm reading. But as far as my early influences, you know, I was trained in the dark room with black and white film, and you know, I loved the black and white photography of some of the kind of Cartier-Bresson, the early street photographers, and Helen Levitt was someone that I found very inspiring. Yeah, so I definitely liked the classical kind of people you study along the way. And then, you know, more recently, like John Fall, he's a landscape photographer, but
Yeah,
he also has a real sense of humor, I think, in his work. So I can appreciate that as well.
absolutely. It's very subtle work.
Yeah,
The humor is there, but you usually have to look for it,
yeah.
along with other things in Fall's work. Um, I say about some of that. Oh, one of the with the specifically the series that we've been discussing most, William Klein jumps out at me as somebody
Hmm.
whose work seems to, or even maybe some Ernst Haas. And I know that can be loaded, and I don't want to put, I don't want to sort of stamp it as these are things that I definitely saw in your work. But there were things that just came up as I was looking at
Yeah.
it.
And I mean, I'd be crazy not to mention Saul Leiter. I mean, his
Oh,
work
right.
is very influential to me, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can see that in your use of color for sure,
Mhm.
in particular. Um, I I've also wondering as I was looking at the work, if you do you reach a point when you're working on a series when and I know you work very spontaneously and intuitively, but do you reach a point where you go out and you're in the streets and you're shooting and an image occurs and you really feel, oh, that's what I was aiming at? Or is that something you're really not going to know until after you take everything back into the studio and start editing?
I mean, sometimes you have a feeling and you're excited and you know, you go back and you look at it and it's not, and sometimes it is. But I do think, you know, often you have a feeling. But I would say maybe with my older work that would happen more frequently. I mean, when I'm working in the city, it's like I adopt the pace of the city. So
Mm.
I'm working very fast. I'm moving. You know, I probably look a little bit like a crazy person, you know, kind of moving through the city. But
That's how
yeah,
you know you're doing it right.
yeah. But definitely when you know, driving around, you know, back roads and pulling off to the side of the road because I see something that interests me, I am way more likely to spend a lot of time with that.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe
Hmm.
be a little bit more studied. Yeah.
Right. Um, the- Another thing, and it's kind of related to that, because there are so many images that have these divisions where it looks like perhaps they're even juxtaposed images that are, that you've juxtaposed afterwards. Um, but it's clear that that's not the case, that these are being made in the camera. Are you aware of those when you're doing them?
Sometimes um the opening image where there's a blue screen sort of on the right and a man on the left, his back is to us. Um you know, there was an advertising screen and it was flashing different things. And, you know, I knew I wanted to do something with that screen. And so I just waited and, you know, the man came into the frame and then it was just a matter of the right image coming up. So
Mm.
sometimes, you know, you are waiting for something to happen.
Right. And then
Yeah,
there are those other times that just present themselves, right?
right. Exactly.
Mm.
Can
Sorry,
I,
I'm just reading notes.
can I make a
Um,
comment on your reading, if you don't mind?
no, go ahead, Bill. Sure.
Um, Joyce, I appreciated your work and also appreciated your words that you used to describe your work. It was reminiscent for me of a very famous neurobiologist, Eric Kandel. He was a Nobel Prize winner who wrote several books on how we see, and how we process imaging. I recommend them, except they're very dense, and let them into the science a little bit until you get to the gist of his work. you can go crazy. But you know, he was a brilliant guy. He is a brilliant guy, and you know, the way we see things is incredibly important to photography. Many times, not to other media, but photography, absolutely. And the way we see things is not the way you think. You know,
Right.
it's quite different. And I love the way you describe your words, the words you use to talk about your pictures, because obviously you see what's in them, you know, and you're able to separate out the issues within the picture and then the gestalt of the picture, what it means. So thank you for using the words and having the pictures together.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Bill is our founder, and we appreciate having him with us. Alexi, is there, you probably had an eye on the chat. Are there any questions or comments that you think we ought to be addressing?
No questions, but we have a comment that says, this new work is so incredibly exciting, Joyce. Brava. Oh, we just got a question. Geraldine says, I'm curious what you get making your composites in camera versus in editing.
What
So,
I get, or
yeah, what you get out, maybe the question is what you get out of. You can unmute if you would like to reframe your question, Geraldine.
Yeah, that was not said very well. Sorry about that.
No,
No, I'm
no.
just curious why you do so much of your work in camera when there's so many options in editing, and why you prefer the in camera so much.
Well, part of it is probably just being lazy. Honestly, no,
I don't believe that, but okay.
no. You know, I am very much interested in what happens serendipitously, and I do think that the experience of making the images, you know, I don't know. To me, it's a different moment when you're on a computer screen working in Photoshop versus being in the moment where you're taking the image. So to me, you know, I don't know. It's just the way I work. I don't like doing Photoshop. I'm not very good at it. You know, I know there are a lot of people that are way better at it. So it's almost like the idea, people say, it's like truth is stranger than fiction. Like what I can go out and see live can be just as interesting or way more interesting than what I could put together by compositing. And that's just, you know, my personal experience. And I respect collage artists who do amazing things, but this just makes sense for me. So
Thank you. I really focused in on your intuitive approach. I think that that's beautiful.
thank you.
And we just got a question, I think, from Megan. The work not only moves me in its sense of loneliness and isolation, but it is also just so visually beautiful. How important or unimportant was that to you in this body of work? So the sense of loneliness and isolation.
And using beauty.
And being beautiful.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because I didn't really read that sense of loneliness and isolation until after I started looking at the work as a body of work. So it wasn't like I was going out and looking for that. But it was also informed. Olivia Lang wrote a book called The Lonely City, which is about her own experience going to New York and you know, finding it to be a very lonely place and kind of using art to express that experience. And I do think that's, you know, a characteristic of cities. I do think that the aesthetic experience that you're talking about is important, but then sometimes there are things when I'm editing that I see that really are kind of off-putting, but they're so powerful, I can't ignore them and leave them out. So it's kind of a choice. It's kind of a choice. I hope that makes sense.
And then, Susan, if you want to unmute and ask your question directly. I think you're unmuting. There you go.
Hi, Joyce.
Hi.
All right, so what I said in the chat was, how often are you frustrated that the photos that you produced, because you're producing the photos and looking at them, I would guess, afterwards. So if they don't adequately portray what you remember seeing.
Oh, it's like a new experience when I'm editing them. So I'm not holding on to anything. It's not about what I experienced when I was taking that picture. It's more about what I experienced when I look at it now. So I sort of separate those two things. Because, what I'm feeling or seeing when I'm looking at a print, I think that there's a danger in like trying to relate it back to, oh, I had this great day in New York. And because that's really not anything that a viewer knows about or experiences with you. So it's really, I would say it's not frustrating. It's just different.
Does anybody else have any questions, comments they'd like to make? We're yielding the floor to you if you're interested in doing so.
Yeah, unmute. Joyce, I have to say your work it's beautiful. I know how hard it is to make a photograph that can transcend to be blurry and yet not be blurry. And that space of that in between of actually making those photographs is remarkably difficult. And so I just want to applaud you for that, because it's a real feat. So the work is really beautiful. Really, Sue, as I said before, really proud that you're the second award winner, and you gave a beautiful presentation. It was incredibly wonderful to listen to.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to say, the way I was trained was to, everything had to be tack sharp, and you don't crop and all of this. And so working this way really goes against the sensibilities I had. My training was one of control. So making this work, it was really about giving up control. And so, yeah, it's hard sometimes, but it's gratifying.
Well done.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, just want to say on behalf of everybody at Pasadena Photography Arts, it's really a pleasure for us to have found your work and to present it and you with our second award, our second annual award. When you start these things, when you start offering opportunities for artists, you just don't know what you're going to get. And but I think I can speak for everybody when I say that we're all very happily surprised and pleased to have you be our second award winner.
And
Yeah,
to
thank you, Doug. It's been great. It's been a great experience, and I think your organization is really doing wonderful things, and I'm happy to be in some small way a part of it.
Well,
And
thanks so much.
just to finish this off, we have a wonderful comment. It says, this presentation was a masterclass in so many ways. Thank you for the bravery in your work and your generosity and sharing your process, your thoughts, and your evolution. What a wonderful comment. And oh, there is one more question, if you don't mind just
Yeah, go
diving
ahead.
into it. Someone wants to just you to dive a little bit deeper on the blurry soft focus in camera work. I'm not quite sure if they want like the technical side of that. Do you have any thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I had I shoot with my camera on manual focus, and you know, I'm throwing it in and out of focus manually a lot, and you know, playing with shutter speed. So sometimes these trails you're seeing are just driven by a low shutter speed, or I'm intentionally moving the camera as well. So yeah, I mean, those are kind of generally the way those things happen for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that last little tidbit.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Joyce and
great.
everyone.
Yeah, it was great to be here.
Thanks, Joyce.
And thank you, everybody, for attending. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.